There we go. All right.
I was going to click on it, but it seems to be paywalled. The New York Times tells me that there's a lot of chaos going on in Judea and Samaria. What's the true story here?
All right. The true story of the chaos of Judea and Samaria. Wait a minute. Hold on a sec. Let me just read you a brief introduction. All right.
All right.
And then we'll get into all this stuff briefly. Because I have a front and center view to the chaos. Actually. All right, cool. So welcome everybody. This is the first ever Post Kahanism podcast. Our guest today is Curtis Yarvin, who is also known as Mencius Moldbug. Curtis and I have known each other for what is now probably coming up on 15 years through the internet.
Yeah, about 15 years through the internet, but we've met in real life.
We met in real life. I crashed on Curtis's couch, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that for
something like that.
Silicon Valley weekend.
My kids were very amazed by this huge Jew who was davening on my couch, and with full regalia, etc. And they'd never seen anything quite like you. And but I still need to make it to the Judean Hills. You're in the Judean Hills, right?
I'm in the Samarian Hills, north of Jerusalem.
Samarian Hills. Got it. And can you? I was asking as we went in, what's going on in Samaria? What's the news from Samaria these days?
What's going on in Samaria?
The real truth on the ground.
I'll give you the 5-minute once over the world version. Basically, back in 2005, our war hero Prime Minister Ariel Sharon ethnically cleansed Gaza and also the settlements of northern Samaria, which means that there's no Jewish presence around Jenin and so on, and big chunks of northern Samaria, which means that going in there is a massive military operation, which means that mostly the army doesn't so much. So the place has turned into a sort of kind of Afghanistan type deal. We're having one of our periodic intifadas. So a few days ago, a couple of Arabs showed up with M16s, which is the terrorist weapon of choice these days. Used to be
really can't imagine where they get those.
Well,
and isn't that the M16? Let me hang on. Those guns isn't that a Finnish gun? No, I think it's actually made in Slovakia. No, it's an old Costa Rican design.
Eskimos whittled them out of blocks of meteoric
Eskimos whittled them out of narwhal tusks.
Yes, actually. So these are well, okay, you got to understand, there's good Palestinians and bad Palestinians. The good Palestinians are like the Palestinian police, which the CIA trains up over in Jordan and arms with M16s under the auspices of the Israeli government, as we agreed in our great peace accords of Oslo, which of course have brought us no end of peace. And then there's the bad Palestinians who somehow get their hands on. There's also good Israeli Arabs who join, like good Israeli Bedouins who joined the IDF and serve faithfully. And of course, all the weapons that go missing. That's just I mean, Bedouins. There's a different concept of property.
Anybody else? Yeah,
indigenous ways of knowing, and so on.
Indigenous ways of knowing. Right. And likewise among the good, Palestinians and the bad Palestinians. It's not typical that these would be the same person. They might be like brother and sister.
Well, no. I mean, on the clock they're this, and then off the clock they're in any case, what happened 3 days ago or 2 days ago was that two of the good Palestinian, the bad Palestinian, I can't tell the difference.
That's it's really Schrodinger's Palestinian, right?
Yes, correct. Correct. Until they take the weapon off safe and collapse the probability waveform function. So they collapsed the probability waveform function and killed 4 Jews at a restaurant about 10 minutes down the road from me, and then wounded 4 others. One of them got shot by one of the Jews that they'd wounded. and was made good, and the other one escaped and was later made good by our security forces.
Got it.
Got it. So a bunch of the rowdy and boisterous hilltop youth, after the funerals of a couple of these Jews, went and apparently became very rowdy and boisterous in some Palestinian villages. And so, I mean, that's it.
Are you telling me, Baruch, that boys will be boys? Are you saying
like, look, like MLK used to explain, right? I mean, I'm for peace, but then you've got to make concessions.
Exactly. I mean, the alternative. Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Correct. As I always say, Baruch, the only alternative to extremist racist terrorism is to support moderate racism. And just the fact that these people are, they're suffering in this way, I think it just shows, I mean, I deplore their actions, but it just shows what's happening here, right? The people will cry out. Yes, the responses are sometimes rough. There's sometimes we're uncomfortable with what the people do, as a people. But look at how we got to this point.
Exactly.
That's sort of exactly.
If there had only been more money for the programs, and
if there's only been more money for them programs, that's right. Has anyone considered the possibility, for example, I'm just throwing this out there, Baruch, of midnight basketball for the Hilltop youth?
So nobody here knows how to throw a football, so that's out. So,
but basketball,
no. Come on. We're off in some bizarro world.
What about midnight? All right. I have it. Wait. Midnight paintball.
Midnight. Man, if there was some sort of sport where you could throw, it was the ball would be shaped like a Molotov cocktail.
Right. Sure. Well, we could have, the Molotov cocktail. It could be like a trial Olympic event, but, yeah, exactly. So you're telling me that boys were boys, and then, the response of the local,
look, first of all, let's be okay. First of all, I mean, life is just funny like that sometimes. These people, these poor Palestinian people. I mean, one day you're eating kanafa and celebrating. Kanafa is like baklava, I think you call it. It's a sweet that you hand out at the crossroads on the road once some Jews have been killed, and everybody that drives by takes some and
honks their horn.
Yeah.
I can see this.
And then the next day, your stuff just for no reason just burns down, and it's very tragic. And so it's kind of the circle of life, rejoicing, and tragedy, and mourning.
Exactly.
Yes.
And on one day they eat the sweet bread of victory, and on the next day they eat the bitter wafers of defeat. Is that what you're telling me?
It's poignant. I'm sure the Israeli government. I'm sure the Israeli government will compensate them all with taxpayer money, because, of course, as usual with these things, everybody in the government, including the local settlement authorities, came out and said, this is not our way. This is very terrible. These people didn't do anything. Okay, some of them did. Some people did something, etc. Listen, I don't really want to get into this. It's exactly the same script as you see play out in every, in Europe, in the U.S., everywhere else, every time some Asian lady attacks some youth's foot, with her face or whatever. I don't want to
hit them with their purse. There was this really regrettable thing in New York a month ago where this pregnant lady just went wild, and stole a bicycle from these youths, right? And they were poor, they were impoverished youths, and she took their bike, and it was very hurtful, very hurtful to them, very hurtful experience. Well,
this is more like the episode on the subway where that guy thought he was Mark Zuckerberg or something and choked that poor Michael Jackson impersonator out. And listen, tragedies happen all over the world. I wanted to get into a little bit why they happen, the context. We may have time to get through all this. We may not have
All
time.
right, let's do what we can here.
So smart people with degrees from all kinds of universities and whatnot call this thing that we're living in the managerial state. Okay.
Yeah.
And you know, that sounds very smart. You called the cathedral. In 2 words, could you, like, for the audience who maybe are dummies like me, can you explain what that is? What's the idea?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you talked to a someone who worked in, you know, the managerial state, and I have a slight beef to pick with that's James Burnham's language, and I have a slight beef to pick with it in specific. I think that, you know, if you talk to most sort of experts in the subject in DC, they would want you to say administrative state instead of the you know, deep state or whatever. Or, you know, my term cathedral is slightly different because it refers to, like, essentially the brains of that organism, which is journalism and academia, but the body of the organism is the administrative state, you know. And sort of journalism and academia are powerful because this enormous body of the state recognizes them as its only valid brain. Something that's true if it's in journalism, it's science if it comes out of academia. Right. But, you know, executing this thing, you know, executing the sort of the actions of government is this thing that we call the administrative state, which is really a sort of kind of you know, cancerous mutation of what used to be the executive branch. And really what distinguishes an executive branch is that it's executive. It's run on the basis of top-down command, like a military or like a well-run military. It's like the president wants this to be done. He says, you know, hey, Secretary of the Interior, I'd like you to turn all of Missouri into luxury condos and squash courts. And, you know, then, you know, but then it gets done, right? You know, that is not the way that the U.S. government works. The U.S. government does not have an executive branch whose mission is to, like, get things done by, like, commands trickling down from the president, who is the commander of all. The United States has what is essentially a giant legislative branch whose structure and policy and budget is dictated by the Congress. And this is why you don't see anyone lobbying really the White House. They lobby on Capitol Hill because Capitol Hill is what actually controls this government. And so you have this sort of thing which is nominally under the command of your elected officials, but in fact has sort of been purely self-referential, really largely since the death of FDR, and it's been growing less competent continuously since the death of FDR. So, you know, it's this sort of thing that is the reality of what you see when you're waving your beautiful American flag. This is like DC. This is the and no one could possibly create this thing, or no one would possibly want to invent this thing if it didn't exist. It can sort of only be explained by sort of bizarre historical reasons.
Wait, hold on.
Just sure.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just to sort of classify it in historical terms, when you have a government in which basically power is a matter of process, then power, if it's a matter of process, is sort of the process sort of pretends to be inhuman or above humanity, or like, you know,
right. We're all following flow charts.
Right. And yeah, right. And what that process really, but humans are always involved. And what that process translates into is effectively the governance of those who have the right to participate in the process. And the right to participate in the process is essentially a sort of rank within this system. And the identity of a regime is defined by its sense of rank in this sense. And so you would say that there are three kinds of government. There's a monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. Monarchy being the rule of one, like a king or a dictator. Oligarchy being the rule of many, and democracy being the rule of all. And what we see clearly is that the processes that drive this regime, this state, very clearly correspond to the rule of many. They are basically sort of networks of the people, the stakeholders, the people with kind of the right to weigh in. Capitol Hill, of course, has this lobbying apparatus that allows, a sort of external input. But when we think of the country as a democracy, we imagine foolishly that the politicians we elect are in charge of this thing, whereas they are really just, for the most part, standing on top of it. And their authority over it, well, and by this I mean the authority of the presidency over it, well, it's sort of considerably greater than the authority of Charles III over the United Kingdom. It can't really be compared in any way to even the authority of George III, let alone the authority of Henry VIII.
Cromwell, right?
And this is important because we sort of regularly write as if President Biden had the powers of Henry VIII. We were always like, Biden did this, Biden did that, the Biden administration did this, President Biden today decided, right? And so, we have this kind of figure of kind of the head of state who, despite being the chief executive of the biggest organization in the world, spends a third of his day on photo ops and is sort of like having this role of kind of a ceremonial executive.
Wait.
But in reality, there is no executive.
Hold on. It's not like a secret to anybody that's got a pulse that the presidency in the U.S. is weekend at Bernie's effectively, and this whole thing runs itself. But I have a question.
Sure.
About Burnham. We mentioned Burnham.
Yes.
Burnham had a thing called the Iron Law of Oligarchy, which basically said, I'm giving you my...
Yeah, I mean, that dates back to Robert Mitchell's, half a century earlier. But yeah, it's essentially...
I'll give the midwit version. No matter who formally runs stuff, in practice, a small cohesive group of people have to run stuff. Otherwise, stuff won't get run. So, that being so, who cares? Monarchy, democracy, oligarchy.
So no. People who say this are simply deficient because they have not experienced the blessed light of a real monarchy. And the thing is that the iron law of oligarchy basically tells you that democracy kind of collapses into oligarchy. That democracy is very unstable at any kind of scale. Really, it's best to regard democracy as a sort of momentary force rather than an ongoing force. You can't really base a government on democracy. You can use the force of a large number of people acting at the same time, not as a kind of continuous power output. It's not a battery, it's a capacitor. You can use that to basically tip power from one oligarchic or monarchic regime to another. But basically, the only two kinds of regime are oligarchic and monarchic. And I think when you look at, sort of major American companies, you see that there's sort of very clear, you do see a lot of companies in which monarchy is kind of descended into oligarchy, and the company is in practice kind of run by a gang of high to mid-level leaders, and there isn't really a strong CEO. You'll see, sometimes they'll call this like a peacetime CEO, which just really means peacetime is just a nice way of saying right? And then you have sort of the wartime CEOs, the Musks, people like that. These are the people who like build companies who,
I read Horowitz's book too, right? But wait, hold on. I got a question. You're saying that a democracy is just a transitional phase between, different kinds of oligarchy.
Well, I think that wait, there's a terminological question deeper than that, because when we say yes, we can say democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy are classifications of regime, but they're really kinds of force within sort of any regime. And so when you're an oligarchy, you have to prevent sort of democratic and monarchical force from appearing, or especially prevent the two from combining.
Yeah.
And because monarchy is sort of always has this kind of, I mean, the people have to love the king, or who even is he, right?
He's got to have magnetic appeal.
Right. And so the like when you describe democracy as a kind of force, you're more saying what are the conditions under which this force operates. So, for example, if you look at the attitude toward democracy, let's say either in the Roman Empire around 100 AD or China today, you have definitely civilized, sophisticated people who are just like, this idea obviously makes no sense and is retarded and has nothing to do with me, right? And
throughout most of human history, right? I mean,
throughout most of human history, like the
Athenian
idea,
democracy, and then for 2,000 years,
and it was when it happened, when Athenian democracy happened, everyone regarded it as a disaster,
because they were psychopaths. Hey, let's invade all the other Greek cities. Let's take the rabble and have them kill everybody of quality, and then we're going to do the same exact thing here in Athens in the middle of an existential war. We're just going to put our leaders to death because we all just voted on it. Then wake up next morning and go, oh man, what?
But they hadn't come up with the trans thing, right? They didn't do trans.
Who actually did was Roman emperors like Heliogabalus and that other weirdo.
Yeah.
So there's your monarchy too.
Yeah. There you go.
Hold on.
Monarch quality is pretty important, but So when you're, just to summarize, to answer your question before we drift off into Heliogabalus and the sexuality of Roman emperors, right? The sort of the clear point is that when you look at this system, you're looking at this kind of fundamentally oligarchic regime. You see that is very strong in Israel, especially. I was just reading, someone in New Haven gave me Ben Hecht's book about Rudolf Kastner.
That's a good one. Perfidy.
That's a good one. That's Perfidy. Yes. Excellent book. And the Israel in which, and what you see from this book is that, it's like people look at the way in which the Allies dealt with the Holocaust, i.e. basically covering it up. And then they look at the kind of relationship between the Jewish agency and the Anglo-American Empire, and they basically see that the Jewish agency is more loyal to the Anglo-American Empire than to the Jews. The Jews. That's right. I was gonna say it. I'm glad you thought of that. The Jews, right? And so it's just like it's not a secret that many of these leaders of peoples are more subservient to their masters than their supposed followers, but it really sort of brings that home. I mean, my friend in New Haven lent me an even a rare book, which is Ben Hecht's book about the Holocaust while it was happening. It's called A Guide for the Bedeviled, and Hecht has this very interesting sort of thing about Hollywood where he's basically
all the Hollywood guys, all the directors, right? I read his biography called Child of the Century, and he goes around Hollywood, and all these dudes who are directors and managers, he's like, yeah, the Jews get killed. They're like, yeah, man, that's really not convenient for my career at this point in time.
Yeah. And here's
who helped him? Mickey Cohen, who ran the mob in L.A.
Really, Cohen gave money.
Mickey Cohen, he didn't just give money; he held a fundraiser. He held a fundraiser. This is in his autobiography. He held a fundraiser. All the Jewish mafia types. This was before the Italians took over.
I so believe that.
All these guys.
All the Jewish mafia types do what they can, but of course, the Jewish mafia types are, very small time compared to the Warner Brothers. And Hecht has a sort of nice point. He's basically this is sort of one of the things that's kind of so retarded. He doesn't say that, use the R word, of course. One of the things that's so regarded about what goes on in the Holocaust and as it relates to Hollywood is you've got this amazing like world propaganda engine, which is totally silent on the subject of the Holocaust. And not only is it totally silent on the subject of the Holocaust, it's like basically as far as Heck points out, he's writing, 43 or whatever. He's like, the whole product of Hollywood for the last 20 years is as if Jews did not exist. Like, you don't see Jews in these movies. You don't see Jewish caricatures. You don't see whatever. And then that continues into like, okay, we know the Holocaust is going on, but we don't want to talk about it. And Hecht has this very simple and compelling explanation of why Hollywood behaves this way. His explanation is it's very simple that Hollywood is controlled by the Jews, or rather by like self-hating Jews essentially, and Jews who want to be Anglos, Jews who don't want to be Jews, Jews who are just like terrified that middle America, which hates Jews, in a just casual way, not in like a full-on Hitler way, they just don't like him, and that middle America will discover that all of their frickin' movies are made by the Jews.
Yidden.
Yeah, right. Made by exactly right. And so because of this, like, there's this sort of feeling like Hitler is so completely wrong about this. First of all, he takes these like these like right. Yiddish speaking Jews hostage. National Jews like won't touch us because we have all these Jews we can hold hostage, right? And he doesn't realize that whatever influential Jews there are in New York are these assimilated German speaking Jews, and they look at these Yiddish speaking Jews who are actually like religious and like wear like funny clothes and stuff, and they speak this language. It's not even a language; they call it
dreadful walking embarrassment. Like this dreadful walking embarrassment.
I'm trying to like I'm like I name my children Irving, and you come across the ocean stinking with lice. You've never showered in your life.
Not even. Look, it's just
and your name Moisha.
Hold on. Sorry. There's a story where you know who Karski was, and I want to know. So Jan Karski was a Polish guy. Polish resistance smuggled into Auschwitz, and then they smuggled him out. And then he went to the U.S. right to try to lobby for the Jews. Well, not for the Jews, but also for the Jews. And he got a meeting with Felix Frankfurter, who was actually Frankfurter was
World's top Jew.
He was from actually a Frankist family. Did you know that? There were like
Sabbateans. I did not know
even worse than Sabbateans. And Frank, but I mean, by this point, I'm pretty sure they were just upper class American agnostics who didn't really believe in anything but themselves and maybe a bit about in the New Deal. And Frankfurter heard him out and he said, I cannot believe you. And Karski says, "You think I'm lying?" He goes, "You didn't hear what I said. I said I can't believe you."
Yeah. Exactly.
Words, I'm not
exactly. And if you think about it, basically, it's sort of that's kind of part of the sort of macabre evil of that war, which is that first of all, the idea of like taking the shtetl Jews hostage to coerce the New York Jews or the Hollywood Jews even is sort of like taking a bunch of like Serbs hostage to coerce the Croats.
I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you, and here's why. Because Jacob Schiff, who was kind of the German Jew, like the New York City, Wall Street German Jew par excellence, spent decades basically campaigning against the Russian Empire on behalf of those same East European Jews.
Yeah, so on behalf of. But the thing is, the on behalf of is always like an excuse. Did he care about those people, or did he just hate the czar? Because fine.
Fine. By the way, I hate to be a nag, man. I'm trying. I'm really trying.
I'm sorry. You'll have to. You'll have to go through it. You'll have to go through and bleep that. You'll have to go through and bleep that. I'm sorry.
Listen.
I live in a coarse country.
But we're trying to be nobles. We'll get into the noble thing in a minute here. So you can understand how Hitler didn't make this fine distinction of, okay, these guys are, on behalf of and not for and all this other stuff.
Yeah, no, he
Maybe
didn't. He didn't understand at all. But like, the guilt, when you think about it, I want to come back to that I can't believe it story, because it's a really important story. And when you think about it from Frankfurter's position, you realize, okay, let's prove the contrapositive here. What if he could believe it? Well, if he
he'd have
could
to
believe it,
destroy everything and spend his life building, meaning his
he'd have
career.
to say it. He'd have to say it. And, let's suppose that he said it and he actually convinces the Allies to say it. Well, okay. The Allies are like, Hitler's killing the Jews. So Hitler comes out and he's like, okay, first of all, I've been telling you for quite some time that this war is about the Jews. They've been denying it the whole time. Now I see they've come out and admitted it. Like, this is progress. This is international comedy is benefiting here, right? This is like Hitler's kind of sense of humor in this stuff. Secondly, you'll notice that what we're seeing from the Allies is more of the same. You remember their World War I atrocity propaganda, which was almost for Huns eating babies. Now, and for a while they tried. They tried to improve themselves, to refrain from their big lies, but like they just couldn't do it anymore. And these are the same old Allies that we know. And Hitler would lay that stuff on.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it, man. I think you're reading into it far too much.
You don't think Hitler would say that?
I think Occam's razor says that assimilated, highly successful American Jew Frankfurter took the same exact attitude as the assimilated, highly successful Jews of Hollywood for the same reasons that they did, which is to say that if he stands up and says it, it's not that, Allied public relations strategy, think of the Allied public relations strategy.
Yeah.
It's that my boss, FDR, is going to be upset. He's going to fire me. I spent my whole life. This is the pinnacle of my life. And I'm supposed to throw that away for these people. I mean, it's sad, I guess, if they're getting killed.
Yeah, of course. And so sort of the question goes up the pipeline, and it goes toward FDR's attitude towards Jews. And, FDR, I mean, there's not just the St. Louis, like FDR, like, who was not, of course, a Jew. So we can't describe him as self-hating. We could maybe describe him as Jew hating. FDR basically blocks every attempt to resettle the Jews. And I'm not just talking about resettling them in Palestine. He blocks the Alaska plan. He blocks, he sends the St. Louis back to, death. Like, he's really, and there's something really, again, like most people they see that FDR did this and then they kind of make excuses for him. Whether like most Americans didn't like Jews, and I'm like,
It would have looked bad. Hitler saying we're for the Jews, and now this makes us look like we're for the Jews.
Sure. And there's also this feeling, and maybe he's a bit of an anti-Semite too, and he's like, okay, Hitler, these people are this problem for Hitler. Why should I solve Hitler's problem for him?
Right.
Why should I cooperate in that way and solve Hitler's problem for him, right? And so there's I think a bit of that where you're basically just it sort of actually kind of feels cleaner to him to have what happened happen than to be like, okay, fine, you get to deport your Jews. We'll take the Jews, we'll put them in Fairbanks, Alaska, whatever, right? I mean, obviously Alaska could have been filled with Jews, right? This is the Michael Chabon book, which I didn't know about until I bumped into it in actually Harold Ickey's diary. But yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, Trujillo in the Dominican Republic was like, give me as many Jews as you can get me. Like, what are you, crazy? I want the Jews, right?
Right.
He felt he stumbled into the world's biggest Amazon sale, and right. I mean, it's sort of what a strange, in a world of monarchies, basically monarchs of shit tier countries all over the world would be like, wow, just pouring Jews into my population is this just obvious upgrade.
Well, maybe. That's what happened when the Spanish monarchs expelled the Jews, and then the Ottoman monarchs said, "Wow, wonderful, send them here." Hold on.
Okay.
I want to let's park the Holocaust for a second.
Sure. I don't know how we.
Yeah,
We
I
got
don't
straight to
either.
that,
Ben Heck.
but
I'm sure our listeners, some of our listeners, will sigh with relief.
I've heard of the Holocaust. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
maybe. Look,
Yeah.
forget. Listen, the Holocaust was 70 odd years ago. Now, what's going on now? What's going on now
What?
is, as I can tell, is that all over the world, everybody lives in one managerial state or another, whether that's an American satrapy like Israel or like in a sovereign managerial state like
I th-
China, right?
I think there are important differences between the Chinese system and the American system.
Right.
They're really very different in many interesting ways. They both sort of involve like a sort of ranked cadre in a way, but I find if you're gonna have a one party state, I think that actually admitting that it's a one party state makes a great deal of sense and simplifies a lot of things.
Sure.
So, the competition between those systems is interesting, and they're very different systems. But, there is a monarchical element in these Marxist Leninist states, which is really absent in the West. But go on.
But they're all undergoing a very similar underlying process. And I wanted to bring up something that Carlyle brought up, right?
Hmm.
Thomas Carlyle,
Sure.
whom I read when I read references to him on your blog. He had a book which I'm not going to say the title of on this, the neighbor question.
Yes.
And
The neighbor question.
in
Right.
the neighbor
In the
question,
neighborhood.
yes, Carlisle says, listen, we're leaving Jamaica. All the Jamaicans, used to be our slaves, and now they're not going to have to work. They can sit around eating various
Pumpkins.
yes, yeah. I'm not gonna quote
Yeah.
the whole thing,
No.
but basically this is going to be very bad for the Jamaicans because they're just going to degrade. As it, of course, Jamaica has proven them wrong. It's turned into Singapore and the Caribbean. Do as Coke
Sure.
is a startup founder.
Sure, you probably drive a Jamaican car, and like
we're doing
you're
this.
considering
The
one. It's an
computer,
electric solar model. Yeah,
the
right,
computer, I
right.
believe, is made in. All right, fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I think we're all Jamaicans now, meaning that effectively most people don't need to really work anymore in the same sense that.
well, we saw that. It's true, and we saw that in America in COVID, where we had this sort of frightening realization that we lived in the pretend economy because nobody worked for a while and it was fine.
Yeah,
Like
I mean, no, people
money
worked,
kept flowing.
but half the
Yeah,
people didn't work,
half the
or
people didn't work.
75% of
Yeah.
people didn't work.
You still have a certain number of people that are needed to actually maintain the infrastructure, but it's
Run the CNC
relatively
machines.
small. Run the CT machines. A lot of it is like, first of all, it's like when you sort of, I mean, the Gulf states are really in advance of all of us here. Like whenever I meet these Silicon Valley, what's the word? It rhymes with maggots. But whenever I meet these Silicon Valley friends who like believe in universal basic income, I'm like, have you heard of United Arab Emirates? Have you heard of the Gulf states? Because thanks to the beneficent products of the dinosaur, they have managed to basically give their citizens, that is their actual citizens, universal basic income. And so they're essentially, when people talk about UBI or they talk about, fully automated luxury communism, they're basically talking about turning us all into Emiratis.
That may
And the
be.
Emirati is one of the most, I don't mind saying, this, the Emirati is one of the most useless creatures that God ever created. I mean, the armadillo, for example, has a legitimate role in aerating the desert soil. I don't know what the desert would be with no armadillos. Even the humble skunk is needed to control the snail and slug population, but like, I don't know why an Emirati is needed. I feel that like, and that's not, this is not the mark of Cain or whatever. This is the result of basically creating a society in which human beings are useless. And so, different kinds of, I mean, one of the things they have, for example, in the Gulf is they have these rigid religious social structures that basically can take useless people and at least keep them sort of in a groove, keep them on the derech, as you might say.
Based.
And yeah, exactly. And based Islam, right? And, okay, fine, but I still like human beings are not made to be useless. Like that's
Right.
of course one of Carlyle's great lines in this sort of different essay. He's basically like, well, sort of, really food, water, and pleasure are like enough for like a pig. Like if you were a
Pig
pig, that would be all
philosophy,
that you
right?
needed. Pig
What's
philosophy,
he
right,
lampooned
right.
utilitarianism, and he said, from the
He lim
perspective of a pig, we should optimize the amount of slop and so on and so forth, so that we all
right,
have room
right.
to trough. Right. So
Totally
luxury pig
anticipating
communism.
exactly, totally anticipating Peter Singer, right? And if you're basically trying to maximize the amount of pleasure in the world, you come up like technology creates, the most incredible like monsters, right? But if you're trying to maximize the production of excellence
Right.
in this world, you'll take a very different tack.
Yes.
And
Wait. I
and you'll
want to
you
get into that right in a sec.
yeah,
Hold
sure.
on. Hold on. I want to take a small aside.
All
We're
right.
seeing in all these managerial states, China, US, whatever, except for Israel, by the way, we're seeing demographic collapse. And
Uh-huh.
it's a function of moral collapse, right? And I'd say a
Sure.
function of religious collapse, just like
It's
Carlyle
like
talked
yeah,
about how sham
it's a
kings brought
collapse.
about by a sham god.
It's a collapse of meaning. I mean, like obviously the idea of having children. How many kids do you have,
I've got
Brooke?
so far six, thank God.
That's solid. That's solid. Well, praise be to God. I have half of that. And the like my newest is 6 months old.
Oh, thank God.
And
Wonderful.
the yeah, he's beautiful. And but yeah, the sort of if basically the purpose of your life is to sort of maximize the integral of pleasure over time, which is the utilitarian axiom. The problem with that axiom is that, especially as technology advances, you get a reductio ad absurdum, right? If your axiom enables you to prove that 2 + 2 = 5, or that it's basically good for everyone to be like hooked up to a heroin stent on the day of their birth, then obviously there is something wrong with your axiom because the result is absurd and unconscionable and clearly just wrong.
Gross.
And
right.
It's gross. And so, sort of realizing that is I don't know, the beginning of some kind of wisdom, I guess.
So you touched on human quality, and I was thinking about this. I was thinking, okay, what's human quality? What's nobility? What's moral strength and courage, right? And I was thinking, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I went to a high IQ educational establishment. I understand you went to CTY, which I also attended back before it is what it apparently is now, which is some sort of trans indoctrination facility.
Yeah.
I'm informed by Twitter people.
I'm sending my daughter there this summer. We'll see what she comes out as.
Okay.
That's all right. That's all right. She's a tough specimen.
So this is like the human as border collie, right? Like high IQ humans as two-legged border collies. Let's give you abstract problems and see how fast it can solve them, how cleverly. But this is plainly not human quality, right? It's not really nobility. And I was thinking that in my mind, nobility is your ability to annul your ego and impress in the service of higher values. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's like self-actualization on Maslow's pyramid of needs, right? And if you're I literally I understand that when you look at that term, it has this literally narcissistic meaning. And one of the things that I've sort of reflected on is my ex, the mother of my child, is a woman who's has sort of considerable mystical practices and attainments, honestly. And one of the things you sort of realize in Western people when they get into Eastern religions, the occult, anything like that, is you realize, and I don't know how this relates to, the human differences between these peoples, but when you look at successful Western religions, when you look at successful Western religions at their highest pinnacle of value, they tend to involve service and obedience to God, to, however that is conceived, to, a higher power, as they say in AA. And, whereas when you look at Eastern religion tends to focus on becoming God. You become a living Buddha. You become, and the sort of the potential for, intensive, basically for placing what's essentially narcissism at the top of the pyramid of needs, where basically, serving God is, was what was placed there by 2,000 years of even just our Christian ancestors, then I think you sort of realize the kind of depth of the spiritual crisis that's going on there.
I've dabbled in Eastern religions too, dude. Not in the Nam, of course. Yeah. No. Just kidding. But I thought that stuff was kind of cool when I was an impressionable teenager and reading
exactly
like 1960s Ken Kesey type, from that milieu type stuff.
Yeah, but all that stuff aims at making you yourself God in a way.
Yeah, of course.
Like that's
Of course, it's all in self-service. The funniest thing about all that is that recently we're seeing. I read that I think D.T. Suzuki was the guy's name that really brought Zen to the whole San Francisco beatnik milieu. I was reading memoirs of one of his followers. It turned out, surprisingly, that those guys are massive degenerates and alcoholics and promiscuous and stuff. And of course, we're seeing pictures of the Dalai Lama engaging in some very questionable practices. So,
really, what has the Dalai Lama done? Does he rape?
He's out there. I think a picture of him tongue kissing some boy. I don't really want to get into. Wow. It was fairly recent.
That's disturbing.
Yeah, gross. Sure. Whatever. I can't believe the Dalai Lama would do. All right, fine. Enough of that. The opposite, the opposite of quality, the opposite of nobility is kind of, even before utilitarianism, you have humans as Hobbes modeled them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's man according to Hobbes? Basically a bundle of desires. And the only thing that's keeping me from turning my neighbors into steaks if I'm hungry is just the fact that there's a sovereign and he'll probably punish me. I don't want to be punished, so therefore no neighbor steaks, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, perhaps it's a bit of a parody of Hobbesian thinking, and you have to understand it as a sort of correction to the very ossified world that existed around Hobbes.
Ossified,
sure.
Hobbes was watching the British Revolution.
Yeah,
they cut the king's head off.
No,
what's ossified about that?
I know. I mean, Hobbes is basically penetrating. Hobbes, people like Hobbes and like Maistre, kind of go together in my mind, and of course even the later Burke, but more Hobbes and Maistre, and George Fitzhugh, I think, would fit in this category, come to mind, because they have they have this, of course, reactionary, like, sort of real appreciation for tradition. Their style is very modern for the time that they're in. And so, Maistre is writing all of this stuff about the sacred authority of the Pope. And this is all very well and good, but he sounds like Voltaire. He thinks like Voltaire. And the result, for these people is that the kind of the conservative authorities of their time, the ones who haven't actually kind of passed through some kind of modern free thinking, never really trust these people
Rightfully
because
so.
yeah, exactly. They have this sort of smell of brimstone about them, even if you can't sort of put yeah, I mean, you're of course just sort of as a convert, like very familiar with this question,
I'm
right? The
I'm
convert is, I
I'm a
mean,
revert, man. I'm a Baal Tshuva, but yes, of
yes,
course.
yes, I know what you mean. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I,
yes,
I
yeah,
I
of
know what you mean.
course.
So, but once you model people as kind of the Hobbesian Homo sapiens, by the way, Hobbes thought that religion should completely be in the service of the state. Um,
Yeah.
because people who are truly religious do unpredictable, loopy stuff, and it's not good for the sovereign. And
I feel that is absolutely true, and it is just as true to say the state should be completely in service to religion. I don't think that consider that to be completely and inarguably true, and I think they're the same truth if you look at them from different sides.
I guess you can make that case, but in the time of
Well,
Hobbes, I guess
yeah.
you can see why they were suspicious of him for saying this. But
Indeed, indeed.
today we've kept Hobbes's model, which is kind of the pig philosophy model, which is to say people are basically a sort of animal to be managed, right? I mean, there's no such thing as
Yeah.
a soul. There's no such thing
Well,
as God.
I think in many cases they do better if they thought of them as animals, right? I think that there's a lot of it would be difficult to imagine the managers of the state of the Ukraine if they just thought of their population as mere human cattle to like sacrifice that number of cattle in such a way. But like
There's always, you can always go down. I mean, there's always something worse. Sure,
it's
I've
true.
never
That's
seen a
true. That's
farmer
true.
try to
That's
transit
true.
sheep. You know,
Barak, have you ever considered going and fighting for the freedom of the Ukrainian people
um,
against the evil monster Putin? You could
we'll get
volunteer. You're
into.
not too old.
I'll tell you what, man. We'll get into the Ukraine a little bit later. Um, I read both sides of the conflict, and given kind
Hmm.
of the total, we'll make a brief digression on the Ukraine.
Are you a native Russian speaker? Or are
I
you
am a
like
native Russian speaker,
yes, yeah, excellent, excellent, excellent.
but a lot of
I
the people who stuff I read are Ukrainians writing in Russian or writing in
of
Ukrainian.
course.
So, um, it's interesting that I've lived long enough to see the Russians make GWAT look like a really well considered and well run policy. Um,
Yeah,
and from the perspective of your average middle class Ukrainian, the prospect of being run by these corrupt, would you call them regards? I mean, you understand these
regards.
guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You understand.
yeah,
Like I'm going off of what I'm seeing from the Russian side. These
yeah.
guys, these
There's
guys
Sovoks.
when
There's a lot of Sovok DNA there.
these
Like,
guys went in, and honestly, because the guys in charge of their foreign intelligence had stolen the budgets and just been writing happy reports, they really thought that the Ukrainian people were like, finally somebody's come to rescue us from the Nazis. And then they were very
yeah,
shocked when the Ukrainian people were like, get away from me. And watching the way they managed the war and considering that they managed everything else probably worse, I understand the Ukrainians. I
yeah.
also I obviously don't think the Azov battalion is a bunch of well,
Hippies.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, friend, whatever. Listen, like I got it. I get it that the Ukraine is basically the ATM of the West, and you know that it's basically like a Slavic Mexico, I guess you could
yeah,
say.
yeah.
But
No, it's
but I can
but
I
I
can see both
also
sides.
but yeah, but each side sort of has a somewhat accurate if you subtract the like Ukraine is Nazistan view, like the Ukrainian view of Russia is sort of accurate in a sense, and the Russian view of the Ukraine as this State Department puppet that's kind of there to attack them and cause trouble
Sure.
is really right in a sense.
Prigozhin said
What?
something very interesting about this. The guy that
Hmm.
runs Wagner Group. He said,
Yeah,
"Listen, we went in there, and the theory was that these guys are going to be part of NATO and they're going to be Nazis and everything else. Well, now that we're in there fighting them, they are effectively a part of NATO and they are effectively Nazis. Russia's whole thing in 2014 had the net effect of taking the 30%, 20% of the Ukrainian population that was pro-Russian and splitting them off from the Ukraine. Yeah. Like it's just one strategic genius.
Did you see the Wagner Group movie Best in Hell?
No, man, I'm not gonna watch that. I'm sorry.
I watched it. I thought it was good. I don't know,
I'm sure it was cool. Dude, I don't watch war movies.
Okay, fine.
No, not because of some like PTSD thing. Just like imagine. You know what? You ever see that movie like Hackers or whatever? And these guys are like, all right, I'm going to break into the Pentagon server, and they're watching like green lines scrolling across the screen, and you're just like, dude.
I know. But that's the thing, watching Best in Hell. The thing about Best in Hell is that basically everyone on your fucking screen actually is a Wagner Group mercenary, and so that's like it's sort of like watching the Hackers film, except all the hackers actually are hackers, and they're actually like hacking in some sense, or like doing the thing that they know how to do.
They're actually shooting real people there. I mean, no, it's entirely possible. I mean, maybe Wagner might.
They're not actually shooting real people, but I wouldn't put it past Prigozhin. Prigozhin is a wild man, right? And I admire, and he's a Jew, right? Also, and I mean,
question mark.
No question mark. No, I could have that kind of sense of humor, but
possibly.
But,
I don't know about it.
Yeah.
So we live in this thing where I didn't consider going over there because I'm a Jew. I'm not a Russian. I'm not a Ukrainian. We've lived with the Russian people and the Ukrainian people for many centuries. We've enjoyed their company so much. Mm-hmm. I wish both of them the best of luck in their efforts.
Indeed. What result do you expect of the war at present?
Well, it's either way, continued depopulation of countries that can't afford it, and demoralization, further human degradation on an industrial scale. Maybe it'll spread to a regional or global conflict. I don't know. It's basically a competition between which side can be dumber and more brutal, and I expect nothing good from any of it.
Yeah. That I would agree on. Sorry.
So look, what I see is that of course you have just general sadistic stuff like I've never seen a farmer, even a negligent farmer, try to trans his sheep or whatever. But generally I see that people are managed like livestock today, right? They're managed by debt, they're managed by specialization. Right, homogenization.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a perversity to it that I think is the most like, it's like if you want to, one of the things I don't like about sort of Burnhamism is that he was writing at the time when these regimes were a lot more rational and hadn't sort of like accumulated like the sort of level of burden of bad ideas that they have. And so, certainly when you look at early 20th century progressivism, which I'm much more in sympathy with than kind of late 20th century progressivism, you do see a sense of like, of course, the relationship between shepherd and sheep is a traditional metaphor of government. It's found many times in the Bible. And so the fact that the sheep are not being protected from the wolves and not being led to pasture, and that they're being led into the desert and fed to the lions, this is like uniquely disturbing from the perspective of anyone who's interested in like the history of governments.
Well, as Hunter S. Thompson said, we've learned a lot about race relations since then.
Indeed, and it's all been for the worse.
Look, I have to. My personal point of view is that when you have a system like this, it inevitably leads to. When you have a system like early and mid 20th century progressivism, it inevitably leads to what we see today.
I agree with that.
Degradation and stupidation.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I would say the thing to understand is, if there's like one thing that I want people to understand the most, it's the connection between this sort of oligarchical meritocracy thing, whatever you call the managerial state. I have a bone to pick with that, whatever you call it. Like, this is like a petri dish for bad ideas. You're not going to grow in that structural environment. The things in the sort of the processes of the oligarchical state, the ideas that succeed in the marketplace of ideas are not good ideas. They are bad ideas. And like, that's really important. And because what it tells you is that when you do have this, I mean, just call it an unaccountable bureaucracy. That's the low IQ version of all of this. Like, an unaccountable bureaucracy is like, breeds like bad ideas, the way like box of macaroni and cheese you left in your fridge for like 6 months like breeds mold. And you know, and the sort of, when you look at the specific bad ideas that it comes up with, you know, just strange sexual things most of all lately, it's like, understand that, kind of learn to see these effects in an inhuman way as just basically epiphenomena of this really, really, really wrong structure of the state.
Well, I think the structure itself is an epiphenomenon of a basic idea, which is that you can, I think you called communism, like define communism as management by experts at one point.
Yeah, no, I think the management by experts is, I mean, that is sort of the structure. And even the idea that like management by experts is better than
Yes.
monarchy, which seems obvious to everyone, but is extremely wrong,
Well,
is like, you know, sure. I mean, you know, does the idea or the social structure, or like, you know, what comes first there?
well,
Um,
let's ask Carlyle. Carlyle said that sham kings were a result of sham God. That, you
yeah,
know, Nietzsche's idea that God is dead because science killed him, and you know, anything that we need, we can just think our way to it. We can reason our way to it from first principles. I want to leave off on this note.
okay.
There's a 19th century economist whose last name
Mm-hmm.
was List. He was a German,
Mm-hmm.
but he
Indeed.
lived and worked in
Indeed.
America. And his
Mm-hmm.
idea was very simple. His idea was that economics needs to be optimized to produce better people, meaning the
Mm-hmm.
human capital of a
Yes,
nation is its most
indeed.
important capital. We see that very clearly in the 20th century, where places that literally got nuked, like Japan, you know, rebuilt their country to powerhouses. Um, Places that were run according to the latest managerial theories,
Mm-hmm.
you know, are run are basically degrading the human capital, which is the substrate for the country, right?
Right.
Um, my question is this: is there you are trying to come up with a way to reform the managerial state, to re-engineer it, that with the proper incentives they can start building their human capital and stop degrading it, right? um
Sure.
I mean, that can, we can kind of summarize your efforts, if I
Sure.
had
But
to.
that
That's it.
basically, that comes about through what's essentially a monarchical state, and
Okay.
the relationship of the citizen, of the subject, you know, to the monarchical state. First of all, the monarchical state is not run from the bottom up like an oligarchy. It's run from the top down. Secondly, its relations with the individual are different, because under any conceivable regime that aimed at basically maximizing the quality of human capital, you're going to look at society and you're going to see that there's basically two kinds of people out there. There's people who are basically atomic, in that they are responsible, or, you know, adults living in the free market, like libertarians or whatever. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I this is terrible. And like libertarians or
What would
whatever.
Carlyle say about
And
this language?
Yeah, that's a good question. What would he say about the atomic libertarian people? He might say, if he was feeling generous, that, there are ways in which aristocrats have always lived that way. Aristocrats have always been cut from social ties in that sense. I think there are a lot more of those people than there should be, but you have to recognize their existence because what exists is, what God willed to exist. And so you have people that are like genuinely atomic and sort of thrive in that aristocratic way of being. And then you have people that don't, who either are attached or, more importantly, need to be attached to a community, which will be a small homogenous community that will basically take ownership and control over them. And if they're basically communal human beings, they should not have any direct relationship with the central government. The central government should have have an institutional relationship with their communities. And so, what that means in practice is, their bank account is community script. They don't pay taxes. They'll shop at community stores and have that sort of be converted on a like keep the money in the community kind of basis. You basically
put
will
all the
see
goyim into the shtetl. That's what you want.
Well, it depends on the kind of goyim.
Gotcha. Listen.
Yeah. The every sure, and like there are people who want to live in something like a shtetl today, and some of them are actually Jews, and some of them are very goyish, and
well, I guess the Amish.
Yeah, the Amish, sure, exactly, look, right.
You're trying to come up with the formula, which will be a governmental perpetual motion machine. But
it's a very, very, vague formula. But like
you can't
have
formalize discretion and wisdom.
Yeah, no, there's always, it's true. Like, the state can always make an exception and reach past down into the community. But normally, like, if you're a youth in the community and you cause trouble, like, your reverend can have you horsewhipped, and there will be no trouble under those circumstances.
The Noahide laws. I knew it.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, let's presumably you'll put this up in some kind of debased form, and then we'll continue at a later date.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you very much for your time, Curtis.
Great talking to you as always, Baruch.
And have fun at your party.
Happy birthday. All right. Take care. Bye.